They are coming. Armies from the west, bearing the cross, and a promise of war in God's name. But I wonder, do they come to aid me or to replace me? I sent for help. I, the head of an empire, have bent before those western barbarians just to reclaim what was lost. Nicaea, the heart of Anatolia. It must return to me. But if I allow them to take it, they will never give it back. I know them. They do not fight for my empire. They fight for their own glory. So I will not let them win, not completely. They will march. They will bleed. They will lay siege. And at the very moment they believe victory is within their grasp, I will take it from them. But what troubles me most is not the Turks. It is those who are on their way here. Because sometimes the ones you call upon to save you are the very ones you must fear the most.
As the Crusader armies arrived one by one at Constantinople, they were received by Emperor Alexios in separate audiences. There, he required each leader to swear an oath that any land reclaimed would be returned to the Byzantine Empire. On the surface, it appeared to be cooperation, but in truth, it was Alexios asserting control, placing the entire crusade within his sphere of power before the first battle had even begun. Alexios I Komnenos played the game with striking clarity. He was not strong enough to save the empire alone, but he was wise enough to make others fight for him. When he came to power, Byzantium was in deep decline after the disaster at Manzikert in 1071, losing nearly all of Anatolia, the empire's vital heartland. At first, Alexios only sought to hire a force of Western knights to help reclaim these lands. But instead, he was confronted with a chaotic crusade, and from that moment, the dilemma became clear. He needed the Crusaders to defeat the Turks, yet he could never allow them to become the final victors, because if they won, they would not give the land back. On May 6, the great host reached Nicaea, and before them rose the massive walls, long reinforced by the Byzantines before falling into Seljuk hands. Nicaea stood at a position of immense strategic value, protected by walls stretching 5 kilometers, 10 meters high, and reinforced with 117 round towers rising up to 17 meters. Beyond that lay a double ditch, 4 heavily fortified gates, and to the west, the city rested against the waters of Lake Ascania, guarded by skilled Seljuk archers. All of this gave Sultan Kilij Arslan great confidence in the strength of his capital. So confident, in fact, that he left behind his family and treasury and marched toward Melitene on the far side of Anatolia after learning that the Danish men were attempting to seize it. Kilij Arslan believed the Crusaders would be crushed, just like the earlier force. But when reports reached him that this army was far larger and far more organized, he immediately turned back, rushing to return and arriving on May 14. At first, some of the Crusaders who had just arrived attempted to storm the city, but were swiftly driven back. At the same time, 2 spies were captured, revealing that the Sultan was nearby. Without delay, the Crusaders sent word to Raymond to advance quickly and secure the southern gate, hoping to encircle the city before reinforcements could arrive. The Provençal force, making up nearly half of the army, was in the middle of setting up camp when suddenly 10,000 Turkish troops charged at them, their advance marked by fierce cries and a rain of arrows. The Frankish troops were exhausted, yet they held their line. Raymond stood at the front, while Bishop Adhemar raised his voice, delivering his first sermon upon the battlefield.
Eternal life stands before you, especially for those who shall be crowned as martyrs in battle. Go forth without fear against the enemies of the living God, and today he will grant you victory.
For hours, the Seljuk forces failed to break the line until Godfrey and Robert of Flanders arrived, striking hard against their right flank. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but in the end, the Sultan was forced to withdraw. The Crusaders took no prisoners. Thousands were beheaded. Some heads were sent to Alexios, who was encamped at Pelikano. Others were hurled over the walls, and many were mounted on spears as a grim warning to the defenders. In response, the garrison used iron hooks on chains, dragging up corpses and hanging them from the battlements. By June 3, the entire Crusader force had assembled and began preparing for a prolonged siege. They formed a council, established a shared treasury, coordinated their actions, and set to work building siege engines. The first was called the Fox, a siege engine designed to shield sappers as they advanced under a hail of crossbow bolts and stone projectiles. But as it neared the walls, it collapsed, burying 20 men beneath it. They turned to ladders, yet Nicaea's defenses proved too strong. A new ram was built, only to be consumed by Greek fire. Then came a new approach. Raymond brought in a master engineer, who designed a reinforced siege engine, the Turtle. Shielded beneath it, sappers reached the weakened Gonatas tower. There, in the darkness below the walls, they carved into its foundation, propping the tunnel with wooden beams, and when the moment came, they set them ablaze. But night had fallen, and the assault was delayed until morning, and when dawn broke, they were stunned to find that the defenders had worked through the night, sealing the breach with stone. Meanwhile, Alexios was carrying out a plan of his own. He sent Admiral Butumites to negotiate the city's surrender, but the first attempt failed. But then, the Byzantines did something no one expected. They used ropes, carts, oxen, and horses to haul an entire fleet over the mountains and down into the lake.
Hurry before the sun sets.
We cannot afford to waste a single moment.
This is our only chance to reclaim Nicaea.
If you want to understand how Alexios truly controlled the game, look at Nicaea. The Crusaders arrived, surrounded the city, defeated the Seljuk relief forces, suffered losses, and believed they were closing in on their first great victory. Everything seemed simple. They would fight, and they would take the city. But no, Alexios knew Nicaea was far too important to fall into Crusader hands. So he sent Manuel Butumites by way of the lake, the one route the Crusaders could not control, applying pressure, while secretly negotiating from within. As the tower collapsed, Kilij, Arslan's wife, attempted to flee the city by boat. But she was captured by the forces of Admiral Butumites. Now, Nicaea was completely surrounded, cut off from any supplies from the lake.
If you do not surrender to the Emperor, you will be slaughtered by the Crusaders.
You fear them so much that you would rather bargain with your enemy.
We understand them. No one truly lost today, except those who believed they had won.
The agreement was accepted, but one final move of political strategy remained. General Tatikios announced that at dawn on June 19, a full assault would be launched. The army would carry crosses and imperial banners around the city, then strike from all sides. The Crusaders agreed and readied their arms. But suddenly, Roman banners were already flying atop the walls. Nicaea had fallen to the Byzantine forces attacking from the west. That was Alexios' genius. He didn't need to defeat the Crusaders. He only needed to reach the prize, one step before they did. So, did he truly betray the Crusaders? From the perspective of many Crusaders, the answer is yes. They bled, they laid siege, and then the Byzantines arrived and took the prize. But from Alexios' point of view, the story is entirely different. He did not invite them to build kingdoms in Anatolia. He invited them to serve the restoration of the Byzantine Empire. In other words, the problem was not that Alexios deceived them. The problem was that both sides entered the same campaign with completely different definitions of victory. To the Crusaders, victory meant taking the city. To Alexios, victory meant returning the city to Byzantium. And when those two visions collided, conflict was inevitable. So why did he both need them and fear them? Because Alexios was trapped between two threats. The first was the Seljuk Turks. The second was the very Latin allies he had called upon. This was his greatest paradox. Without the Crusaders, he could not reclaim Anatolia. But if they became too strong, Byzantium might lose those lands. Not to the east, but to the west. Which meant Alexios was not playing just one game. He was playing two at once. One against the enemy in front of him, and one against the allies behind him. And perhaps the most intriguing truth is this. He seemed to fear the second game even more. Alexios is not the kind of figure people love. He is the kind people respect.